2018 to 2019 was that time period where we really saw the resurgence of the whole retro shooter genre, and the original Iron Fury was one of the titles partly responsible for that rise.
Some assembly required.
Developed by Voidpoint and published by 3D Realms, it was a gorgeous, challenging shooter running in the build engine, really owing a lot of its existence to one of its biggest influences, Duke Nukem 3D. In fact, the protagonist Shelly was even meant to be a side character in Duke Nukem Forever, having gone through a few iterations throughout the years.
After I'm done with it, you can claim what's left.
Either way though, it saw its full release in August of 2019. I even did a video on it as well if you're keen on hearing about it in more detail. And it seemed to be successful enough that they went to work on a sequel with the upcoming Phantom Fury. For the meantime though, we'll have to make do with its just released expansion, Aftershock, which takes place after the events of the base game, and the big question here is it any good?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Well, if you just had to have my eye on Fury and couldn't hold off, you sure could do a hell of a lot worse.
So much for your pension.
It's probably been a good 3 or 4 years since I last played Ion Fury, but very little has changed in that time. You're still playing as Shelly Bombshell Harrison, working as an officer for the GDF in futuristic Neo DC, and trying to stop the evil Dr. Heskel.
It sounds like I'm not the only one who's had it with your meddling.
And it's still a mostly fun, action-packed romp, packed with plenty of pop culture references that show the people that worked on it both had a fun time putting it together, and are also the best kind of geeks.
Read my facts! No! Please, no, I cannot be fired! I'm fired!
Gameplay-wise, it's about as basic as first-person shooters come. You explore these 3D environments, fighting back against a pretty rudimentary roster of enemies with a sizable roster of weapons. Shelly starts off with her trademark Loverboy revolver, an 18-round triple-barrel beast that makes Dirty Harry's 44 Magnum look like a water pistol in comparison. Then you'll eventually get the Disperser, a shotgun grenade launcher hybrid, penetrator SMGs, a chain gun, the ion bow, and finally the bowling bomb and the cluster puck. Plus an electrified baton that's mostly used for powering up generators. Overall, it's an effective lineup of guns, and there's always a use for every weapon at one point or another. Even the revolver, which gets quickly replaced, can be handy for dealing with small groups of the weaker enemies, able to lock onto multiples at once and fire off quick shots in succession as its alternate fire. Yeah, which is useful for those cybernetic heads, which still take the cake as being one of the most annoying enemies in any FPS game ever made. And the ion bow having that outright broken alternate fire mode where it overheats and fires out a bunch of projectiles that can shred through the toughest of enemies in seconds. The mechanic of the bowling bomb seeking out nearby enemies is always entertaining too, and I love the gimmick of the chain gun being something you salvage after a boss fight.
You're gonna have to do better than that, you bald-headed bitch!
Iron Fury was, and also is still a really good looking game, and it's impressive how they've managed to cram so much detail into such an old graphics engine. Build engine games were always pretty synonymous with environments that seemed much more true to life, especially by 1990 standards, and the locations in Iron Fury are all the various futuristic areas of Neo DC, with lots of visual jokes packed into these levels as well. And it's really about the most detailed you're ever going to see sprite and texture work in a 2.5D engine. There can often be a sense of almost visual clutter though, because of just how much stuff is going on here, and some areas do feel like they've been designed more around looking good than actually playing well. In fact, that's something I've been saying about this game since its initial release, and just the way that there's often so much stuff going on here that enemies have a bit of a tendency to kind of blend in with the background. And it's for that reason that I actually enjoyed this thing a lot more when I replayed it, because I was more familiar with the layouts and enemy placements by that point, and I could appreciate the way the world was constructed, as opposed to being constantly frustrated by not knowing where the next ambush was going to be coming from.
Think again, asshole.
But overall though, you sure can't knock this game in terms of how it looks. And it's one of those things where it really looks like what your brain remembers 90s shooters actually look like, if that makes sense. It also had a decent length overall, coming in at around 8 on an hours for a first time playthrough, which is doubly impressive considering the amount of secrets and hidden stuff to find on the side.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me.
So I guess my point is that if you're just getting into Iron Fury for the first time now in 2023, in content alone, not even considering that expansion, you're definitely going to be getting your money's worth.
Oh, you throw quite a party.
And then even for people who've already played it, but maybe don't want to play the exact same campaign again, they've added in the all-new Arrange mode, which changes things up entirely to create a whole new experience. There's all those new enemy variants from the expansion pack added in, along with new encounters, and some of the levels have also been mirrored completely, making an already challenging game even more challenging by totally reshuffling the deck. Or as they say in New Zealand, reshuffling the dick.
I thought that was quite smart.
Plus, there's also just a whole heap of minor improvements to the base game as well, like bug fixes and visual updates. And the coincidence of an update like this coming out right after Cyberpunk 2.0 drops is not lost on me. But all anyone really gives two shits about is whether or not Aftershock is worth playing, and after blasting through the whole thing in about like 4 or 5 hours, I can say with a resounding confidence that the answer to that is a big fat yes. Because for the most part, this is still really solid as far as retro shooters go, and besides, I mean, what else are you going to be playing this week? Hyenas? Lamau. Anyway, the story kicks right off after the ending to the base game with a shock twist where Haskell is somehow cleared of all his wrongdoings, with Shelley even being reprimanded by the GDF for her actions. And in fact, throughout Aftershock, you'll even be chastised frequently by General Rockford to the point that he fully cracks the shits and sends GDF soldiers after you.
Harrison, is your head on your shoulders, or is it firmly up your ass?
With there being both light and heavy soldiers, and I have a bit of a theory here that the heavy soldiers are supposed to be those same enemies from Sin episodes, which would make a little bit of sense considering the upcoming sequel seems to be trying to merge both those universes together. The first level then opens with Shelley trying to drown her sorrows at a bar to then be attacked by Haskell cyborgs who more or less force her hand and thrust her right into combat. And again, right off the bat, you see that insane level of environmental detail that Ion Fury is known for. With this highly detailed environment, we can even go ahead and smash the individual martini glasses hanging above the counter. Then in the next level, you'll control a wrecking ball and demolish nearby buildings to create a makeshift path ahead.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
Aiming like a wrecking ball.
As for all the new content, well, like a lot of expansion packs did back in the day, Aftershock goes for adding in alternate ammo types for existing weapons, as opposed to a whole heap of entirely new weapons from scratch. So now for the disperser, you've got explosive pellets sharing the same slot as the standard shells, and then you've also got gas grenades sharing the same slot with the explosive grenades. The explosive pellets are laughably overpowered and a lot of fun to use, plus they work pretty well with that whole overkill system, where killing enemies with high-powered weapons causes them to drop armor shards. I do think the gas grenades are a little bit too gimmicky to be all that useful though. I don't know, I just kind of feel like they take too long to kill something to be all that effective. But any weapon that gives me an easy reason to use a reverb fart sound effect is alright in my books. And enemies have also been modified to reflect these new ammo types, which means you'll see cultists who fire off flammable rounds or use gas grenades.
Rest in pieces.
The only genuinely new weapon here is the one you take from the mangled, crushed remains of the hoverbike after you write that thing off completely, called the Home Wrecker, named after your mum obviously. And this thing admittedly is really fun to use, firing out these powerful homing projectiles that kill most enemies in a single hit. Thing was though, half the time I forgot I even had this thing, and the fact that it's bound to the 0 key by default made me feel like a bit of a contortionist every time I tried to swap out to it. But it's really handy even at just clearing out some of those basic enemies, as like I said, these guys will often blend into the background, making a homing energy ball the perfect way to deal with them. Another thing they have added in though is a bunch of new power-ups, and quite a few good ones as well.
Holy shit!
Now one of these is a blatant reference to the ghost trap from Ghostbusters. It's a device you throw out that sucks in all nearby enemies and does massive damage. Another one gives you this kind of fake slow motion effect after swilling back some kind of doped up energy drink. And I say it's fake because it's not really even a player any kind of massive advantage. It really just seems like it's outright slowing down the game speed without any real benefit. It's not entirely the most realistic energy drink either, because at no point after having it did I suddenly have the craving to play Fortnite, watch Mr. Beast videos, smoke cheap weed, or tell my parents and siblings to go fuck themselves.
That boy's parents must have made some terrible mistakes.
Shut up, Mom!
And then lastly, there's a power-up that just turns you into Robocop, putting scan lines across the screen and giving you unlimited revolver ammo. And this one is just so blatant that I can't help but find it awesome.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
But the real brand new inclusion and gameplay feature, and truly the centerpiece of the whole expansion, is the Hoverbike.
Say, that's a nice bike.
Say, that's a nice bike.
Shortly towards the end of the first act of this new campaign, Shelley comes across this thing in a shopping mall and quickly confiscates it. And driving it around then takes up the next hour or so of the entire expansion. Oddly too, the first level where you're driving it, it basically has you racing against the clock, flying down this very linear track whilst also avoiding enemies and obstacles to try to set the fastest possible time. And I don't really know what purpose this serves outside of maybe bragging rights and maybe as a bit of a pissing contest for people on Discord servers. Either way though, it's a fun enough sequence where you can see the destructive power that this bike has firsthand. After that is when it opens up a little bit more and has you making pit stops here and there as you need to periodically go off on foot, eventually blowing up a nearby dam to proceed. Which again shows off those good old-fashioned destructible environments that the build engine is known for and really excels at. And again, truly the best thing in this game has to be the feedback you get from blowing shit up. Also the kind of thing that goes hand in hand with a hoverbike that fires out goddamn homing missiles. Now the bike isn't really designed for comfort though, evident by that absurdly slow strafe speed it has. Instead, it's a bit more like hit and run, encouraging the player to keep moving, swoop around and zero in on enemies directly. And I'd say that this whole section is easily the best the expansion ever gets, because it has you up and about pretty much the entire time, moving around at breakneck speeds in this all new vehicle. Being able to stop whenever you want and go off and explore the area on foot, combined with the relative ease of locating your bike again, just makes these levels feel a lot less restrictive. The only thing that kind of chafes my willy here is that the bike doesn't have its own health bar. Seems that all damage instead directly goes to Shelley, which can at times make you feel like a bit of a sitting duck. I don't know, maybe they're taking influence there from Half-Life 2 or something. In fact, having said that, for the final part of this act, it shifts to a third-person perspective, and it has you taken on a giant airship as you race down this canal, which, yeah, gave me serious Half-Life 2 vibes. There's even a section later on where you need to power up a fan to use its propulsion to help you reach a ladder. Plus also do some platforming across very familiar looking vats of toxic waste. Yes, very familiar.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
It's kind of a shame that once the bike is gone that you're really just back to moving around on foot for the rest of the campaign. And about the only thing that it really does after that that's any kind of interesting is when you're inside this volcano and have to use these biosuit power-ups to get past all these superheated areas unscathed. Sadly as well, the conclusion to the expansion is really kind of sudden and abrupt, to the point that it actually caught me off guard and had me wondering if the review build I'd gotten hadn't actually added in the ending yet, because it just kind of hard cuts to the credits with no real resolution. It would have been cool if there was some kind of a cliffhanger or a way they start to work the plot into what was going to happen in Phantom Fury, but if there was, well, I certainly missed it. But the only bit I genuinely didn't like here in Aftershock is a sequence where you're going through these dimly lit catacombs, flipping different switches to raise lowered bars to try to navigate your way back to the surface, and this whole area is just absolutely fucking dreadful. The reason is that I feel like Iron Fury excels when you're in those more opened up areas and can utilize those smaller pieces of cover while pushing forward on enemies and using the weapon of your choosing. But for most of this, you're in these narrow passages, you can't see jack shit, and enemies seem to be purposefully put in these darkened corners to ambush you, and it's really just not very fun to play through, at all.
Got your ass.
Just kind of reminded me how unbalanced this game can feel at times, and the amount of sudden deaths you suffer from here, it often just becomes too many to count. And it's still as much a game about knowing the locations of enemies beforehand as much as it is just being decent at shooters in general. However, I think my biggest critique about Aftershock is that outside of a few interesting areas here and there, it's just not really doing anything all that new or innovative anymore. You've got to consider, right, that the original Iron Fury came out way back in 2019, around the same time of other shooters like Dusk, Medieval, Proteus and Project Warlock. It was the initial days of the whole retro FPS revival trend, and these earlier games were just trying to closely replicate the same style of gameplay we had back in the 90s, and they succeeded and were popular as a result of that. But then shortly after this and around that same time was when Doom Eternal was released, and in response, this whole subgenre got turned on its head. Now we suddenly had games like Ultra Kill, Get to the Orange Door, Severed Steel, and more recently Turbo Overkill. The influence the movement shooter genre had in the mainstream was starting to seep into these indie shooters, and it became much more now than just circle strafing and holding down the left mouse button. Now you could dash, you could double jump, you could slide, you could use grappling hooks, and master mechanics like fast weapon swapping. And these were concepts that these combat loops were often outright designed around, and something that was outright required for success in some of these games. We'd even start to see the influence from other first-person genres, like the way that Sims creeped into the indie scene as well with stuff like Gloomwood, Fallen Aces, and even 3D Realms' upcoming Graven, which seems to have its own immersive sim elements as well. And I don't know what the fuck Cruelty Squad was taking influence from too, but either way, much more than just your typical quote-unquote boomer shooter, and a long way from the kind of games we were playing back in 2018 and 2019. Even a game like Sulaco, which is still more or less just a retro FPS on the surface, throws in all these recent mechanics to modernize it somewhat, like being able to aim down sights, being able to dash and slide along the ground, along with making the shooting feel much more punishing and downright tactical, with the whole increased aggression and AI of these enemy soldiers. And that's really Aftershock's biggest problem, is that it feels like it's come right out of 2019, which is fine, that doesn't make it bad, but it is kind of hard to ignore the fact that the genre's just evolved so much since then. And I can't help but feel that it's ironically a little bit dated now. I mean, I kept finding myself almost pressing the shift key out of habit here because I'm so used to dashing in these kind of games now, and I'd swap out weapons during combat, but not because I needed to, but just again because it was almost out of habit. If all you had was ammo for the submachine gun or even just the shotgun, you could easily finish the entire game without ever needing to use anything else.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
The only really big new thing that Aftershock adds in is that whole hoverbike sequence, but even then, like, we've seen these kind of vehicle sequences done as well, notably recently in Turbo Overkill. And I'm not trying to say that any of this makes Aftershock or Iron Fury for that matter bad. What I'm trying to say is that it might not have the same impact that it originally had 4 years ago. But if you don't mind spending money on what's really just a glorified, albeit polished and pretty honed map pack, then that's fine, but let's not pretend that it's more than it actually is. At the end of the day though, I'd still have no issues recommending Aftershock to pretty much anyone. And chances are, most people have already made their minds up to begin with. It's not going to revolutionize the shooter genre, and it's not really going to revolutionize Iron Fury either, but if all you wanted was another 4 or 5 hour long excursion where you could blow shit up, or to the commentary of Shelley's enjoyable one-liners, well, then Sunny Jim, you're not going to be disappointed.
Oh, I don't think that's covered under warranty.
And if nothing else, it'll help us kill some time until Phantom Fury finally sees the light of day. God knows when the fuck that's going to be.
She.